the aggregators could not work together in a way that the networks work together and decided that Nielsen was going to be a common rating agency.
Right, so Google will give you a bunch of numbers, and Facebook will give you a different bunch of numbers.
And you sort of sit there and you say, okay, fine, I just spent X on the internet. I don't know how I've driven awareness, or I've driven definite interest, or I've driven anything. And so, really, for it to become effective, we have to have a way to measure whether or not our advertising on the internet is moving the dial.
And who's the logical person to step in and be that arbiter, as it were? Is it Nielsen again?
It would be Nielsen. It could be a bunch of different, frankly, it could be a bunch of different groups. Nielsen has just started to work with Facebook. We did a big test with Facebook over the summer, which was very effective. We wrote a lot of 3 different movies, and they really boosted awareness for us. So we've seen that to be really effective.
Right, so that's one way in marketing that it can help you.
And then the other side of it is really on the distribution side. Right. I mean, it's clear that people want to take movies and either buy them or rent them over the internet. And there's a couple of things that stand in the way of that being effective. The first is the fact that really they don't want to watch them on their laptop or their PC. They do want to watch them on their television.
Yeah.
Televisions are getting internet enabled, so that'll be one way. The other problem is the way the movie industry is set up, because we did these deals as an industry with the big paid television operators in this country, different ones, Stars, HBO, etc. Those companies have holdbacks, which means that when they're showing a movie, you're not allowed to sell the movie on the internet. And it's very disconcerting to the consumer to sort of sit there and look and see on their PlayStation Network or iTunes account and suddenly see, oh, I can't buy Batman today because it's being shown on HBO or on Stars on4. And we've got to work our way around that.
Right, brilliant. Well, let's drill into those 2 things then. Let's go back to the marketing. What can and can't the internet do with pushing a movie? I mean, is it for all movies, or does it work particularly for those aimed at particular demographics? And how do you decide how much of an emphasis to place on internet marketing?
I think there's a couple of components to it. I think part of it is clearly the internet works really, really well for what you would imagine to be heavier internet users. Science fiction, horror, genre pictures that appeal to young people.
This is a sweeping generalization about the internet users.
No. But hang on. On the other side of the ledger, which is what we saw in the Facebook experiment that happened a lot with movies like Julia and Ugly Truth. Heavy internet users, as it turned out, are women 40 plus.
Right.
They're heavy Facebook users too.
So it's a matter of which. Okay, so some movies that will be more suited to Facebook style promotions. Others will be something really elaborate with an alternate reality game and a special side, depending on the audience.
Correct. And the real difference, I would argue, in terms of how reliant you can be on the internet is in certain markets you've really got to heat them up with other forms of media, television in particular.
Right.
Other things you can weight more heavily through the internet. So if you look at a movie, for example, like Resident Evil, which is a horror movie we had, or Superbad, those are the first movies we saw where awareness was really built on the internet as opposed to being built on television. Typically, that it gets built on television and then boosted on the internet. It's really in the mix. And now, by the way, the newest thing that's come into the mix, where we emerge, is the oldest media of all, which is outdoor.
So how does this change the picture? You're moving back towards posters and internet for some movies.
Yes, and now that the postering, I mean, I think the city fathers don't like it very much, is where the outdoors become digital. If you live next to one of these digital signs, you curse it every night. But since they run 3, 4, 5, 6 different ads on them, that's really become a very good way of us going about it as well.
Right, and that's also because for those sorts of movies, they are more likely to appeal to people the kind of people who stop watching TV or watching less TV.
Yeah, exactly.
And then,
well, in truth, keep in mind, today people watch more television than they ever have in the past. The problem isn't that they're not watching television. The problem is that they're not watching the ads.
Right.
And they're skipping them.
And they're doing other things while they're watching TV, they're paying attention? Or?
I think they were always doing that.
Okay, so it's just PDRs and that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's it.
And what are you doing in social media to try and build word of mouth? You're doing things on Twitter. Twitter presumably is a double-edged sword for you because you've got instant word of mouth, which would be great if it's a good movie, and not so great if it's not such a great movie.
Twitter is I think Twitter is the technology or the media technology that's come along that probably has had the single greatest impact in the shortest space of time since commercial television or commercials on television.
For you or for
the movie industry.
Right.
For the movie industry. And And we saw that this summer. I mean, I think movies were made and were broken by Twitter.
Have you got a specific example or two in mind?
Without citing specific examples, but what happens now, and we've seen it, is when people see the movie, it's not even that the movie isn't good. That's not the issue so much. The issue is that they call out when the advertising has been false. So if, for argument's sake, say you have a movie that is basically a drama, but you realize that's a tough sell, so you market the comedy in it. The minute somebody sees the movie and they Twitter to the mass audience, they fooled you. This is not a comedy. It's a drama. You'll see the movie tank.
So you have to be much more straightforward with your marketing.
You have to be a lot more truthful in marketing. You have to be a lot more truthful in marketing and speak to what the movie really is. But here's the thing about Twitter. The dilemma for us is we recognize that it's a very powerful force. We really do not have any understanding of whether or not it can actually be used on our behalf. The only thing we know that it can be used is if we have the goods, if we have a great movie, which candidly is not that often as an industry, but when we do have a great movie, or we have a movie that's really appealing, let's say that, and that happens.
Everyone's going to be twittering what you just said there.
Yeah. A great movie, but we have appealing movies all the time. You want people to see it early, because then they're going to Twitter and they're going to talk about it, and they're going to say that it's a movie that everybody should see.
So it's a sort of force multiplier, to use the military jargon.
Correct.
Yeah.
Particularly movies, and again to make the distinction between great and appealing movie, a movie with a good cinema score, which has now become the big determinant of what the multiple is on a movie. I don't know if you're familiar with this whole cinema score thing.
Right.
If it has an A cinema score, which doesn't necessarily mean, by the way, that the critics like it, they may think it's, direct, but the public happens to like it, and the public is what matters.
Yeah.
Those things tend to do really well and have a big multiple, and Twitter has a big effect on that as well.
So next week, a lot is hanging on the Twitter reaction to the Michael Jackson movie then.
I would imagine that it will be a movie that will be much Twittered, yes.
Because you're not going to get anyone to see it before the first night. So.
No. So when the movie premieres on the 27th, when it's first seen, I think a lot of people will talk about the movie, yes, on Twitter. Right. I think, by the way, it'll be very, very happy with what they see. But it's really good.
And it's a limited window that you're waiting, that it's going to be...
It's a 2-week run. Yeah.
Right.
It's a 2-week run.
And that's the sort of Disney play, isn't it? That you make the DVD available for 10 minutes, so everyone who thinks they might want The Little Mermaid. I don't know if Disney still does that, but they used to do it. Annoyed the hell out of parents everywhere.
Yeah.
So eBay came along and just destroyed that.
You know what it really is it's more, it more speaks to what happened with Hannah Montana, which is to say that you have now alternative media being shown in cinemas because they've gone digital.
Yep.
So instead of just movies being shown in cinemas, you have everything from opera to concerts to everything else, and those tend to have limited runs. And the Michael Jackson movie sort of falls between two schools, so it's being treated that way.
Right, that's an interesting development. Just going back to just to finish the thought on online marketing. Who is driving that? I mean, District 9 was a movie where there was a very big and successful online campaign.
There was.
Does it depend on the producer taking ownership of that, or are you doing this centrally? How's that working?
I think it's a combination of things. I mean, I think in fact District 9, the real thing that got District 9 going was outdoor.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know.
So I was taking pictures of those posters in May, and what the hell is this?
Right, aliens stay off, and it was on the benches and on the posters and everything else, and then that came back onto a full online.
And then you go and Google it and try to figure out what's going on, and then it takes you to the
and that worked really well. And in that instance, Peter Jackson, who was the producer of the movie, has been very internet savvy for a very, very long time. If you remember when he was filming King Kong, you could actually once a day go online and see what was going on in the making of the movie. Right. And so he got himself very involved with the marketing department back at the studio in terms of the whole online campaign. And it was a pretty collaborative experience in that area. And it worked really well. And the movie was really good. Right. So that doesn't hurt. The movie's really good.
Okay, brilliant. So the other thing you were saying about the internet, there's the marketing opportunity and then there's also the distribution opportunity. And of course the flip side of that is piracy.
Yeah.
Where do you see that debate going? A number of countries are now looking at this idea of graduated response, where you choke off the internet connection, or you make it go very slowly for people who are obviously file sharing. think the first attempt to get this through in France
Right.
failed because the opposition MPs hid behind the curtains in the Parliament building. So it looked like there weren't very many of them, and then at the last minute they all pushed out from behind the curtains and voted against it.
Right.
And
we got it passed, though.
yeah, eventually you did, but they had to
Thanks to Mr. Sarkozy. The courage of the president, yes.
Right.
Very appreciative.
And she's very obviously opposed to piracy as well. But, do you feel that you're...
I'm not sure anybody's in favor of that.
That's true. Well, I think some young people probably are.
Maybe.
But anyway, do you feel that you're sort of the argument is going your way, and that this is emerging as a consensus that governments will get behind, or do you still have to convince the ISPs in particular that this is the right way to go?
I don't think it's the ISPs. I think, first of all, let me qualify some of this stuff. It's not choking off the internet. It's actually telling people after they've demonstrated illegal activity on the internet 3 times, you give them 3 notices, and then you suspend their service. So you're not just slowing down what they get. You actually say you no longer have an internet service provider.
Right.
And to that point, I think Lord Mandelson in the UK has been a really great champion of all of this, and we're incredibly appreciative of it. I think it's slowly going our way because they've seen in certain markets like South Korea, which now has over 90% high-speed penetration. Overnight, the home entertainment business evaporated because of piracy. We see it happening in countries like Spain. And in this country, where we still have, I think, broadband penetration, high-speed broadband penetration in the low 40s, so we're lagging, everybody understands the importance of putting broadband out, just the way that it was really important that we built an interstate highway system in the 50s. But just the way we did it in the 50s, we need to have speed limits and make sure that the trucks aren't too heavy when they go on the roads, and make sure there's a police force and everything else. There needs to be rules of the road. And I think people are gradually recognizing that in the absence of that, you're just going to see an entire industry, be damaged by it, frankly. The universities have been very helpful in this regard. We've got a lot of universities to step up and say to the student population the same sort of 3 strikes rules that the graduate are responsible for. Right. And that's been very effective.
Presumably they're worried about liability to some extent. The ISP's response to this is that this is, historically they've always said, what travels over the network has nothing to do with us, and
right.
We're just blind dumb pipes, and we're just passing on the traffic, and they really don't want to go down the road of having to police what's happening. But
that's what the Digital Millennium Act really gave them the authority to say, correct.
Right, so how are you going to persuade them that, to get on board with this? Well, is alternatives are worse, or just because they're going to be
I think there's a lot of different ways. First of all, I think the ISPs, particularly the cable ISPs, want this in some form or other, because at the moment you have these heavy users who are taking up enormous bandwidth.
Right.
On the other hand, they want to play on a level playing field, so they don't want to toss someone off their network only to discover that they've gone onto a rival's network as a subscriber.
So they could benefit if there is this common set of rules.
There is. If there's a common set of rules, and everybody has to function against those rules, and that's really what we're talking about in the UK, because you've got Sky wanting one thing and talking having another, and BT another, and you want a common set of rules. I think really what you need to have is an independent agency which polices this.
Right.
And whether it's a government agency or it's a private agency which is funded jointly by the content providers and the ISPs who police it and really monitor it, that's the way to go. I'm not sure that I'm suggesting to put the burden back on the ISPs.
I think in Britain that's how child pornography is dealt with, for example. There's an independent service providers organisation, and essentially they did it to head off heavy-handed government regulation. They said, look, we can police ourselves, let us do it, because otherwise they were worried that the laws would be drawn up in a way that would harm their legitimate business.
Exactly right, and I think that's what the Attorney General in the state of New York, Andrew Cuomo, was advocating too, and that's what you get with child pornography in the state as well.
Now the flip side of this, again, we've got the flip side of the flip side now.
We're on the edge now.
Exactly. Anyway, so maybe we've got a hypercoin dimension.
All right.
If on the one hand you're going to get laws or some kind of regulation on this, the other thing that the industry has to do is to launch new services that make non-piracy attractive as well. Obviously, music didn't really have a helping hand at all from the lawmakers, and we're seeing a lot of innovation now in new music services because there have to be more carrots because there aren't so many sticks.
Right.
But on the carrot side, what is the movie industry going to be doing? Do you believe in this idea of having a locker where Disney is talking about this, and in fact Thomas Hess from Sony Music was talking about this idea that we store our media in the cloud and we can access it from any device, and these are the sorts of services that will
Yeah, I think
if you can get over the piracy problem.
I think there's two things that really, from what I understand, that hold the consumer back from using legitimate services. The first is making sure that the movies are available all the time, and we have to sort ourselves out as far as our existing deals with pay television providers and everything else to make sure that's the case. The second problem is, if you buy 6 to 8 movies, your hard disk is full up. So you've got to lock the product.
Yeah.
And there's no question that once you lock the product, the whole thing will become much more appealing to the consumer. That being said, you can't locker the product and then say to them, oh, by the way, when you go back up to your locker, today we've decided that this movie is not available to you today because it's showing on whatever pay service it is. So the whole thing is slightly iterative.
And you also have to wait for the broadband networks to be there to support that kind of service as well.
Correct.
Okay, so with this release window problem then, when do all of these kind of agreements that you have with the video on demand, the existing video on demand people, when do they all expire?
They expire in the future. I think what has to happen, several years out.
Several years, okay.
So I think what has to happen in the interim is there has to be a negotiation to figure out, because their window right now sits 6 months after the DVD window for the most part. The truth of the matter is we sell 70 to 80% of what we're going to sell on a DVD in the first 8 weeks.
Yeah.
So why they have to sit 6 months out is a puzzle. Right. So maybe there's a way to say, okay, fine, you move in a little bit and you give up on, there's a bunch of bargaining.
What other pressures are there on the current setup with release windows? I mean, some people have gone as far as suggesting that a few movies have done this, the DVD coming out at the same time as the cinematic release, or even video on demand at the same time. Obviously, the cinemas aren't going to be keen on that. But what other forces are there trying to change the current system, and what might change?
In terms of theatrical release, I know we at Sony believe that theatrical release is critical to the well-being of the movie industry. It brands the picture, it establishes an audience for a picture, it establishes an identity, and all the windows that come after it are based upon however successful that initial window is. I think we're really divided in terms of this desire to sit on top of the theatrical window. If, for example, you're in a family product, which Disney is, then 70 to 80% of your DVDs are being bought by people who've already seen the movie. You're a kid, you've seen a great Pixar movie, you want to own it. Yeah. So your tendency would be to want to have, as Bob Iger has sometimes expressed, the window moved up. But on the other hand, if you're District 9 or your Julia or your Ugly Truth, which are the movies we had this summer, or Angels and Demons, 70 to 80% of the people who buy the DVD have not seen the movie. So you're less desirous of having that movie available right there at the cinema the moment people walk out and say to themselves, oh, I want to buy it, because those aren't the likely purchasers of a DVD. So, we differ slightly on where all of this.
So we just need more flexibility, perhaps, in a less rigid system.
I think that's exactly right. We need a less rigid system. We also potentially need a new window.
Right.
And other Peter Turner spoke about it a long time ago. We need a window potentially that sits there. That's a 48-hour window that sits between the theatrical and the DVD, which is directly to your television, which is a sort of a high-price rental window. That's what we're talking about.
So, right. Okay. And then the other thing I wanted to ask you about this with sort of new formats things was 3D. 3D's really come up the field in the past couple of years.
Yep.
Presumably, well, it's great because you can charge more for it. It gets people into cinemas as an experience they can't duplicate at home. It's impossible to pirate. It's great. We're going to see, some people say everything's going to be 3D, but all of those benefits don't have to apply to all movies for it to still be a great business, do they?
You mean that all movies don't have to be 3D?
Well, yeah, I assume you don't think they all will be. Was it like colour?
No, I don't think it's like color. I do think a lot more movies will become 3D over time than just animated releases or motion capture movies or science fiction movies or horror movies. I think the thing that surprised me most about 3D when I finally understood what it was, and we just had one with Cloudy, which is an animated movie, is that it's not 3D in the old sense of it, which is like it's coming at you and it's a thrill ride. It's actually an immersive experience. And I think Jeffrey Katzenberg was very right to be an evangelist because he really understood this early on, as did Bob Zemeckis, as did Jim Cameron, as did all of these guys. I think, though, that to make it a really spectacular experience, it takes a certain level of craftsmanship and knowledge that these kinds of directors have actually invested in. And so you're going to see a whole group of directors come on who start understanding how to make a movie in 3D, which is a different thing than just making a movie 3D after the fact. And then, at that point, yes, I think you're going to see big action movies become 3D, potentially see thrillers become 3D. I don't know whether it gets to the point whether it's romantic comedies and dramas, but it will definitely go further than just the big family movies that we see.
And then you get to sell us our movies all over again in 3D on some kind of 3D Blu-ray or something.
Well, that, again, that may be although Blu-ray is now really taken hold and is really growing very rapidly, but the one thing which, in addition to it being high def, the one thing which is an added benefit to Blu-ray, which nobody has really talked about because they didn't have the monitors, the fact that there's enough data storage on it that you'll be able to present movies in 3D.
Right, okay, so that turns out to be a good thing about it.
A great thing.
And presumably, that's very useful until the lockering and the high-speed networks are all there, then you are still going to want to shift movies physically.
Yes. So, for the time being, it's going to be the most efficient way of getting the movie onto the screen.
Now, there was a big hope that Blu-ray would make up for the declining sales of DVDs.
Right.
To what extent is that happening?
It hasn't really, because what happened in the recession, if you really look at what's happened in the recession, isn't that there are fewer people watching movies on DVD or fewer transactions, it's that there are fewer people buying DVDs, there are just a whole lot more renting DVDs.
Right.
And the thing that was so profitable to the studios for all those years, were people going out there and buying DVDs. And now what they're doing, whether it's a Blockbuster or Redbox or Netflix or whatever it is, they're renting because people are watching their pennies, and many people say to themselves, "I'm not sure I need to own this. I can rent it."
Now that said, as an industry, you did very nicely for. Am I right in thinking you did reasonably well in the session? In the sense that cinema attendance held up well, and
it was completely counterintuitive. If I had made a bet, I would have thought, "Gee whiz, everybody's gone out there and bought these enormous flat screens, have these DVD players. They're going to stay at home. Petrol prices are high. Let's just cocoon and watch movies at home." Quite the opposite. What happened was people said, "I don't like all this I'm getting claustrophobic sitting at home. I want to get out and I want to be with other people," and movie attendance actually went up.
What do you think people were shifting from? Do you think it was like restaurant attendance, or is it a cheaper night out to go for a restaurant?
Yeah, I don't know what the sort of the trade-off was. It could be going away for the weekend. It could have been maybe a small vacation. It could have, as you say, gone out to a restaurant. There was a component of that too. I think it was on balance a cheap way to sort of get out of the house and have a night out.
It's parallel monthly argument instead of buying a new pair of shoes kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions from the floor? So we're open to some if we can. What I want to talk about, we have a question over here. I think, should we wait for the mic and then everyone can hear the question?
My name is Crystal, and my question is with regard to digitizing movies and the whole iTunes phenomenon. I think it was last year when Real Audio came out with their product to be able to take a DVD that was purchased, digitizing that and putting it on the hard drive so you could watch it over and over again. Those of us with young kids appreciate that because they'll watch the same movie over and over again. But there was I think like 8 studios sued to stop that. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on the future of having sort of these video jukeboxes, because as parents with kids who watch the same things over and over again, it's actually quite convenient. But anyway.
So handbrake is the software you want there, but the trouble is that a lot of modern DVDs are resistant to being handed.
Well, they're not resistant, they're encrypted.
So then you have to run this. You have to run the disc through Mac the Ripper first and make an image of it. Then
Which is illegal.
Is it?
Yeah, because it stipulates that you're not permitted to do that with our DVDs. It's very different from the... We as an industry took a very different position from the music industry, which is one of the reasons, I feel that people still have a different attitude toward the value of the movie as compared to what music was. Music did not protect the music on the CD. It was completely illegal to rip the CD. People did. I think it's one of the reasons why there was as much piracy as there was around music. We spent a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of effort to make sure that our DVDs were encrypted. And you can take that DVD and you can play it in your car, you can play it in your computer, you can play it in your DVD player, you can play it anywhere you want.
It's one of these. It's the thing. So my son has sort of his 40 favourite movies on his iPhone,
Right.
And he watches them in a very odd way. But then right, he likes to have them in his hand. And we used to carry a portable DVD player around with planes.
Right.
But then there was a nightmare that there was the region coding and the portable DVD player became region 2. So we love this because it does away with all that rubbish, frankly, from the point of view of the parent. So there is definitely a demand from the market for a simple way of doing things. What do you think will give us that in a way that you're happy with?
I think you'll buy it digitally.
We are doing that, but we can't get everything on iTunes.
Well, that's the problem. That is the problem, going back to what we described earlier. So until such time as we solve that problem, I don't know.
But the issue is, you're saying to me that this problem isn't your fault. That it's the historical agreements that you have in many cases that are preventing you from doing the thing that you would like to do that we would like you to do.
Correct.
So what we really, so the bad guys that we should be frowning at are in fact, well, as it were, the people we would like to come to the table and negotiate with you about this, the cable operators and so on, who have these.
Yeah, but they'll make the argument that they paid for those rights and they get it, and so
they'll have to be compensated in some way. But I think there is demand for negotiating download these things. So I think what you give away with one hand, you may take with the other.
I completely agree with you. It's the ripping DVD parts that I can agree with. It always interests me, by the way, that when I go on Google and I type in "rip the DVD," then I go on the paid search part of the site.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of sites you can find that you can download software to rip the DVD.
Yeah.
So presumably they paid to put that advertising on there.
I don't know how they make their money. I mean, it's Canberra, it's open source. So
I don't really know.
yeah. Anyway, okay. Do we have any other questions from the floor? We have a question back here, over the corner of the park.
Hi, Judith Maria, I work for years. I just had a question about whether or not, in the whole issue of piracy, and I hear this a lot when I'm talking to people, is there a difference in terms of watching streaming video and movies versus downloading them? They seem to think that as long as they're not keeping it, they're just
As long as they're not
keeping it, they're not keeping it, they're just streaming it, that's okay.
Do you make a distinction?
Do I make a distinction? Absolutely.
Streaming and downloading.
Yes.
Does the law make a distinction?
Yes. Both are illegal. Both are illegal.
Oh, I see. Right.
When we look at a movie, we view the initial theatrical window. Right now in the United States, for argument's sake, say there are really only 50 million people who really go to movie theaters out of a population of 300 million people. Yet about 250 million people go and see movies in one way, shape, or form. We as the studios feel that every time they see one of our movies in whatever format that is, whether it's on television, whether that's on a DVD, whether that's streaming, whether that's downloading, we should be compensated for that because we spend a lot of money to make the movie, we spend a lot of money to market the movie, to make people aware of it, and it's the ancillary markets which actually pay for the movie. It's really not the theatrical window any longer, except in rare instances. So for us to make a distinction between streaming and downloading, I mean, the only difference I would argue between the two might be that one is a rental model, and you could say, okay, for rental you pay a lesser price than for owning, which would be the downloading model. But in either instance, you should pay for it.
But with a locker, you would buy the movie, live in a locker, and you could stream it whenever you want to watch it.
Exactly. Yes, you would.
But presumably you could, I think the Disney model has some kind of DRM, so you can then also take it with you. And this was something I wanted to ask you about Sony, because Sony is in a clearly very good position to do that kind of thing. You've got the PlayStation, you've got the PSP, you've got the content, and so on. Now, historically, the problem that Sony has had is that when it goes to the other studios and says, look, we've got all this, we've got the ability to create a platform here, the other studios have said, yes, but you're going to favor your own content there. Is that still a problem? Or
I really don't think it is. I mean, I think, first of all, the studios overcame that with Blu-ray, I think.
Right.
Howard Stringer did a really tremendous job at getting the industry to understand and make this, and Bob Iger was enormously supportive, as was Jim Giannopoulos and Peter Chernin and Fox, at establishing Blu-ray as the standard for everything. And they didn't say that, oh, it's just because you own Sony Pictures and vice versa. I think if you went on PlayStation Network, which has every studio's movies, you'd see exactly the same thing. And I don't think there's any bias in that.
So you're not, I know that there is representation of all of those
You will not see any Sony movie that's sort of front and center.
Okay, good. Because
they're a retailer. They're only interested in selling what sells. So they're not taking one of our flops and pushing it out in front of one of Warner Brothers' successes.
Right, brilliant. Okay, and what about the ability to take movies with you and all that sort of thing? I mean, can we expect to see? I don't know what you think of this Disney locker model, but
I think
is there going to be any industry standard there?
I think what's going to come up, right now you have iTunes and PlayStation Network, we have all these things which are pretty device specific.
Yeah.
I think when you really understand what made DVD as big a business as it became, was you could buy DVDs in any one of 30,000 locations in the United States, whether it was Target, Walmart, Best Buy, your local 7-Eleven, and you could be very confident that you could play it in any one of a number of different devices, and it didn't matter who the manufacturer of those devices were. In order for us to make the digital business as big as the physical business, we have to provide exactly that same platform to the consumer. So you have to have a locker, which you could have multiple storefronts to, and that locker basically stores your movies and allows you to play it back on a Sony machine, on a Dell computer, on a Panasonic, on a Sharp, it doesn't matter what it is. Because I think ultimately, and listen, I lived at AOL, and I saw what the walled garden did in the long term to AOL. It's fine when people are on training wheels and getting on the internet. They're happy to sit inside of the walled garden. The minute they understand, oh wow, there's a big world out there, that's when Yahoo and Google and everything else started being AOL. I think the same is true of these walled gardens that these retailers have created. I think people will want to take their movies and I paid for it. I want to move it to any device I want to play.
Now the trouble is that the owners of all the walled gardens will make exactly the same argument. They all think their walled garden is going to win. So how do we find a way out of this? I mean, DVD.
Well, I think there's a lot of work with inside the industry, working with other consumer electronics companies to build that platform, which will sit side by side with these various walled gardens.
It never happened with music. So the SDMI was the attempt to do it in music.
Right.
It was a flop. It was idiotic anyway. I think competition to get people to break it, which they did. And then Apple had to come in and be the sort of, the person that wasn't any of the candidates, that's none of the irrelevant.
Right.
It could be a sort of fair mediator between them. But obviously, presumably you don't want to have someone like Apple come in and do that to you this time. So do you think there's more likelihood that the movie industry will succeed where the music industry failed in achieving a common standard?
I think there is. There's once we sort of get into the mix, who knows? But I think there is, and there's a lot of work afoot to try and make that happen.
Great. So he stands there, and he stands on measurement for internet marketing. That's the other thing you said at the top.
Yeah.
Brilliant. That's been absolutely fascinating. My pleasure. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks a lot.